Hello, it's Friday, July 24th, and I'm very excited that it's finally time for my 2020 honey harvest. And so I'm going to make a series of videos that are hopefully going to demonstrate how this is done. Normally, these are occasions for a neighborhood party, and people are over here helping out. Unfortunately, due to coronavirus this year, I'm doing it by myself in my basement. Which would also normally be rented by now, but this is not a normal year. Anyway, I'm going to make a few videos, and here's the first one. Right here I'm showing the basic equipment we're going to use for extracting. This here is the actual extractor. I'm going to show it in more detail in a minute. Here are the buckets that the honey goes into and gets filtered. These are the actual filters that the honey goes through. This is a pretty interesting thing, this catch basin, which I'll explain further in a minute. But first of all, here's what a drawn frame of honeycomb looks like. This is from a few years ago, and it's not a perfect one. Normally, if they're really nicely done, it's evenly drawn across the whole area of the frame. And of course, when there's honey in them, you have that beautiful golden liquid inside each of these hexagons, and then you have a wax capping, which is a beautiful white wax on top. And you're going to see that later, hopefully, when I bring out the actual filled up honeycomb later today. I'm in a bit of a race against the weather, and this is a reality for all beekeepers. We have to work with the weather, and today we have a 100% chance of rain, but I'm seeing that we have a possible window of dry and actually sun for the next 3 hours or so. So I rolled out of bed and came down here, and obviously you have to do this when it's not raining because the bees can't survive in the rain. So anyway, the next thing I'm going to do take you on a little bit of a more detailed tour here. So this is the catch basin, and initially, well, let me back up. This is the extractor. It's borrowed from the beekeeping club I belong to, and what you do is you get the honey. The frames off of the hive, and you put them in sideways like this into the extractor, and it takes a little bit of doing. This particular one is a 9-frame extractor, so you can get 9 of them in there, and this is after removing the wax cappings. And then what you do is you close the lid, and it's a hand it's a hand-cranked extractor, but you turn this for several minutes, really, and by centrifugal force, it kind of spins out the honey, and then you also reverse it later to go in the other direction, so you get the honey out of the other side. But actually, before you do that, you take the frame of honey, which still has the cap, the wax cappings on it, and you put it on this piece of wood here, and then you take something called a hot knife, which is this right here. It's just a kind of a flat piece of metal that plugs into an outlet and heats up, and you run it across the top of the frame like that. When the heat of the knife combined with the cutting edge kind of allows you to shear off the wax capping very nicely. And what you want to do, of course, is get the wax off, exposing the honey, but you want to minimize how much honey you actually remove. It goes into this catch basin, and then there's another one underneath, and you can see there's sort of a metal grid there, and the idea is for the honey to drip through off of the wax cappings. You can actually get a considerable amount of honey from just the cappings, and then at some point later in the process, you can open this valve and harvest that honey. Another thing I have to do is to figure out how much honey I'm going to have. And I do that first by weighing an empty box of frames. It's called a super for various reasons, and it has, in my case, 8 medium deep frames of comb in it, and there are 8 different frames and the box. So right now I have to weigh the empty one. Let me see if I can do that on my scale. And you can see the empty one weighs about 12.4 pounds. I weighed this other one and it was a little under 12, so I'm just going to call it 12 pounds. So later when I come back with the filled up ones, I'll weigh that, and of course I can subtract the weight of the empty ones to get a sense of how much honey I'm going to have. It's actually usually less, but that then tells me how many bottles I'm going to need. Here's my, I don't only harvest the honey, I also try to produce candles afterwards, and here's my wax candle making station. I've actually spent a fair bit of the last few months melting down regular candles, old bits of leftover candles, and I was amazed to get all of this stuff. Those are all wax ingots, basically, which I'm going to remelt and turn into actual candles. But over here you have, this is actually beeswax that used to be honeycomb, and I melted that down. It takes many frames of comb to get this amount. And here's another one from a previous year. They don't look great, but by the time the whole process is done, you have these beautiful beeswax candles. You can have it that way, or the little ones, sort of decorative ones. And then obviously, with regard to the honey, this is sort of what the finished product looks like. These are 8-ounce bottles, and so obviously, if I have 30 pounds, I need 60 bottles, and it's helpful to know that because you sometimes have difficulty getting them at the last minute. But that's pretty much the tour. Here again is the bucket, and I have several of them. I'm going to be using them later. The filtering process is just done very simply with gravity. You use a, you probably can't see this, but you use a 600 micron filter and then a 400 micron filter to filter that stuff, and then finally a 200, which is the finest. And this whole process takes really the better part of a day for the honey to run through naturally through all of that. I generally don't heat it, and I also don't do anything else to change the nature of the honey. I try to keep it as pure as possible. This is kind of a fun thing that I learned about at some point, and I'll show this later, but it's a leaf blower, and it's going to allow me to separate the bees from the frames by simply blowing them out. This turns out to be a effective and non-irritating way, surprisingly, to get the bees out of the frames. And of course I have to have the frames empty in order to start working with the honey. So I'm going to go outside now and give you a little tour of the bee yard, and we'll see you in a bit.